Thank you. Welcome, everyone. This is the webinar for Xsensio. Before I hand over to Esmeralda, I want to just share a disclaimer. I want to remind everyone of the following information. Propellex is a funding platform. It is not a broker-dealer. A syndicate, if formed, will be managed by Plank Fund Management Corporation, which is a Nevada-registered venture capital firm. Private investments are highly illiquid and risky and are not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not indicative of future results. You should speak with your financial advisor, accountant, and/or attorney when evaluating private offerings. Neither Propellex nor Plank Fund Management nor any of its affiliates makes any recommendations or provides advice about investments. The information you will hear today may make forward-looking statements about investments which have not been reviewed by Propellex or Plank Fund Management Corporation. You should not rely on these statements, but should carefully evaluate the offering materials in assessing any private investment opportunity, including the risk factors that will be provided for your consideration. With that, let's get started. So everyone, welcome. It's mostly gentlemen, but fantastically, we actually have a lady speaking with us today. I'm going to walk you through the platform very quickly. So I'm going to take the controls for a minute from Esmeralda. I'm sure you are all very familiar with the platform, but that said, I'm just going to go ahead and walk you through in case you're not. That's our home screen, of course. When you log in, you land on your dashboard, which is this. You go to Invest in Startups, and here we are. This is Xsensio. They're raising their Series A. You will be able to review, of course, all of the information that Esmeralda is going to be mentioning today. We start with the whole entire profile. Their pitch deck is online. Please review it. Their profile is online, which is beautifully done. Thank you. There's some risk factors which are provided for your consideration, their entire team, etc., etc. Some videos, and when this webinar is over, the webcast will be recorded and presented here as well. Here are the terms. Assuming you're interested, you should just go ahead and pledge interest. With the terms will be displayed here. So with that, I will just stop my share and hand it over to Esmeralda. Everyone, if you have questions, please share them in the Q&A at the bottom. I will moderate the questions, and if Esmeralda thinks it appropriate, she'll also answer questions as she goes. So with that, let's get started, Esmeralda. Floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Swati. It's really a pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to share what we're doing at Xsensio, the exciting work to disrupt the healthcare industry. I am very happy to share that we have now an oversubscribed round, but just as an introduction, I would like to say that we're very interested in having experienced angel investors come in and be part of this round, even though we've already achieved our target very recently. So with that, let me introduce you to, just to give you some introduction about myself. So I am Esmeralda Megali, the CEO and co-founder of Xsensio. I live in Switzerland, where the company has been founded, and the whole team is in Switzerland. But my background and the background of my co-founder is also very affiliated with the US. I have an MBA from MIT. I have worked in a venture capital firm after my MBA, and very quickly I realized that I was more sort of prone to actually get my hands dirty and be an entrepreneur myself, instead of just evaluating deals and working with CEOs. So here I am with a company that has a very big ambition. And I created this company with Adrian UNESCO, who could not be here today. He's in between meetings right now, but he is a leading scientist in the field of nanotechnology. And we're actually a spin-off of the nanotechnology lab here in one of the most renowned centers in Switzerland. And he has himself, so he has a PhD in the field, but he has also a postdoc from Stanford. So this is just a little short introduction about what we're doing and where we're coming from. So with this, let me introduce you to what we're doing. So the motto of the company, the vision of the company is Lab on Skin Sensing Platform. And we chose this really to capture the essence of the company And our goal is to actually transform the healthcare industry from centralized labs and point of care into really as reactive as possible and proactive as possible diagnostic system. And this idea comes from two sides. So from my co-founder, who has been working on making sensors as small as possible in his lab and working with a lot of industry players to develop really the next generation of sensors. But also I mentioned that I had been working in a venture capital firm after my MBA at MIT. And in that firm, we were working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on next generation diagnostics tests. And at that time, point of care was really the sort of cutting edge in healthcare industry and diagnostics. But then talking to doctors and hospitals, we quickly realized that although that was really a big revolution from centralized labs to point of care, it just, at the end of the day, just gave us one single point about a patient. So it's just a picture of a patient at one given time. But what happened just before or what happens just after is never captured. So you have to go back and redo another test. And that made us wonder, what if we could actually change this technology and go from static information to dynamic information? How we could really go from a picture of the health of a patient really to a movie. And that's the whole beginning of the Lab on Skin platform at Xsensio. So so we created a company, Adrian and myself, with another person. And since then, we've been working really very, very well together to create this company. And now we're at the point where we have our Series A. And I mentioned that we're already oversubscribed, but it's such a turning point in the life of the company that we're looking to broaden our investor base and get as much experience. I would say our investor base, and I will talk a little bit more about that, but is really on the tech side. And we are looking for people who have also been working on the medtech or healthcare side as well, and have that broader experience to be actually as part of, our investor base and be part of our ecosystem as we're navigating this next phase of growth. So that was a quick introduction about the state we're at. And let me now go into what we're doing and why we're doing this. So let me go into the problem that we're trying to solve. And the problem that we're trying to solve is that if you talk to any healthcare provider around the world, there's one problem that is always there, is that there is a shortage of doctors and nurses. And that is estimated roughly at 10 million people shortfall. And this actually has a lot of implications in the hospital, but also when patients go back home. Because there is not enough nurses and doctors who are monitoring patients inside the hospital, then there is a cascade of events that are likely to happen. There is not enough monitoring of patients. There is delayed care. So there is, let's say, it takes every time a lot of resources for an overstretched team to do a blood test because there is not enough staff available. And that creates a system that is very reactive. So because you cannot monitor all the patients at the same time, you're missing some patients who can go from sepsis to shock with organ dysfunction. And that creates a cascade of events that are very bad for the patients, that can lead to organ dysfunction. But it's also bad for a hospital that is monitoring the risk inside the hospital. And it's very, very bad for the healthcare system as a whole, because then suddenly you have these immense cost that could go from somewhere in the ICU, 100, 200, 300K for a stay that could have easily been prevented had there been more nurses and doctors monitoring patients. Actually, we're working with different hospitals in Europe, but also the Mayo Clinic in the US, and especially the Arizona site is working with us. And the Mayo Clinic is a shareholder of Xsensio since the last round, and we're extremely happy about that. But that shows you the need for healthcare providers to solve that problem. So here you could see that Dr. Ayn Sen, who is the head of the ICU, being our advisor and recognizing that there is a big need for a solution like this. So I would say the obvious solution to this would be to add more nurses and more doctors inside the hospital, to have more visits of patients when they were released from the hospital. But none of us believes that this is a sustainable solution in today's world. In the US, in Europe, in Asia, there is a sort of big burden on the healthcare system, and it's not possible to add more patients and more monitoring by nurses and doctors because the system is already overstretched. So this means that we have to find a better way of monitoring patients and enhance the monitoring that has already been done by doctors and nurses with a much smarter way and enhance it with automation and new tools. And this is where Xsensio enters into play. So we are developing really an AI-powered patient monitoring system that we call the Lab on Skin platform. So it's really a hardware solution based on nanotechnology and all the proprietary knowledge that we have inside the company, combined with AI, to be able to, in a very novel way, monitor patients and enhance the healthcare team around patients to be able to monitor and see whenever something happens that is not normal and be much more sort of proactive in the medical care. So we're developing the Lab on Skin platform is a device that has at its core very, very small proprietary sensors that are able to measure things that are not measured today and measure them in a continuous or semi-continuous way and capture this information, as I was saying at the beginning, in a movie-like sort of dynamic way. If you're all familiar with CGMs and how CGMs have transformed diabetes care from a finger prick for diabetes people that give them just a snapshot at a given time to a CGM device, continuous glucose monitoring device, we want to actually extend the concept of a CGM to many other biomarkers. So this is a Lab on Skin platform measuring biochemical data. And I'm not talking about physical data that are already captured through wearable technologies. And there are plenty of those capturing heart rate and number of steps and movements. And there is a huge ecosystem of apps around it. So I'm not talking about physical data, but I'm really talking about biochemical data. And the only example today are CGMs for glucose. And so our ambition is to expand this to be able to capture vital information about patients in a very novel way. We see a huge market opportunity that we estimate at roughly $6 billion market opportunity for the US and Europe to enable what we call AI remote patient monitoring in the inpatient care. And this is where we start, outpatient and ultimately home market. And we want to do this with a technology platform that is broad, that is very versatile and modular. And where what we change, and we can go a bit more in details about the technology, where we change is a functional layer that we change inside the device. So let me go into more of what we want to track and why. So we're developing this platform, and so horizontally, you can see the different applications. So most of our resources today of our team, our small R&D product development team, is focused on inflammation-related biomarkers. And inflammation-related biomarkers are today measured through a blood test, either in a big lab or at a point of care. But that gives, as I was saying, just single point measurements, just a static information, a picture of the patient at a given time. That's the first application, but we have a pipeline, a very, very active and pipeline with the nanotechnology lab academic partners, but also internal, where we work on extending this to other biomarkers. So inflammation is number one, but we work also on cardiovascular and heart failure biomarkers, cancer treatment, and then expanding this across inpatient. This is where we start. But as our technology becomes more and more cost effective, we want to target outpatient and home market, where we're also building collaborations with hospitals and also have huge interest from medtech players. So what we do, we are actually, you can see here, we have, our team is working towards a clinical study in one of the leading hospitals in Switzerland and the ICU in particular. So we have this collaboration with the Mayo Clinic That would be for a future clinical study, but our first in-human study is going to be beginning of next year, where we're going to test our technology on 140 ICU patients. And what we do actually, and our objective is to be able to capture information through our device in a continuous way, and then have the doctors go with their standard of care blood tests at every few hours, where they capture blood and they capture lactate in blood, and they see what is the standard protocol today is they see every few hours. It could be every 6 or 12 hours, but if a patient is more in a severe case, it could be every 2 or 3 hours. Take blood samples, you look at lactate, which is the single most important biomarker in the ICU, and then you adjust treatment. If lactate increases, then the patient starts to be in shock, hypoxia, tissue hypoxia, there's not enough oxygen in the tissue. And then if you're not monitoring this well, then very quickly the patient goes into organ dysfunction. And that becomes very, very severe. And then potentially dialysis for the rest of the life of the patient, and huge costs and high mortality as well. So the study is to have patients go with the standard protocol of care. They're taken care by the ICU team. And then in the background, we're going to capture our information in a continuous way on body, also looking at lactate, but we're not doing this in blood, we're doing this in interstitial fluid. And our goal is to show that there is very good correlation. And because we're doing it continuously instead of single points, we can start seeing onset of changes. And onset when the patient starts to be worse and worse in sort of deterioration of the health of the patient. And we can show that we can be much more proactive, but also monitoring when the therapy is in place, and to show if the therapy is effective or not, and not wait for the next blood test to see that the therapy was not effective. We also have, we have a study that is fully paid already through grants, and we have as a second generation cardiovascular, where we're going to look at pH and lactate like the first study, but we're adding CRP, which is a biomarker of inflammation as well, but not the severe case, but rather the onset, and then NT-proBNP, which is a marker of heart failure. So I mentioned that product number one, which is going to be tested in a few months, looks at a smarter way to detect shock and detect and improve therapy response. And the problem here is that it's a huge market size, so 1.2 billion. And the ICU are rather effective and efficient in their operations. But the main issue of an ICU is not their internal operations, but the fact that they receive from the rest of the hospital patients that are not well monitored in the rest of the hospital, because sepsis and shock is rather difficult to monitor, and blood tests are not done very frequently. And so ICU get overburdened by all these patients coming from the rest of the hospital. And as a result, they cannot have patients properly monitored, and in the rest of the hospital, they arrive in the ICU, they overcrowd the ICU. As a result, ICUs have to manage beds, and they cannot have elective surgeries, for example, programmed, because they always have to keep some beds available. So there is a huge cost for an ICU because of that. Not talking also about the burden on hospitals, especially with value-based healthcare, that is going to penalize hospitals if they're not monitoring patients well. There is not sort of reimbursement that is happening because it's sealed for each condition. And so it's a huge burden and a deadweight loss for a hospital. And we have a lot of interest from both public hospitals, but also private ones that are trying to improve their revenues and profit. And so they see this as a very, very smart way of monitoring their patients and monitoring their risk. So we see our product number one as a way to control cost internally, to improve the health of patients and the outcome, but also a risk mitigation inside the hospital and risk stratification. So suddenly you could see the hospital or the rooms in a much smarter way, where you are looking at different, on the dashboard of the hospital, you can see that certain patients, patient number one in room 30 is stable, doesn't need to be visited. but then 32 and 34 are starting to be, you can see an onset of a change, and this is where you have to put all the resources of the hospital. So it's a risk mitigation, risk stratification tool for the rest of the hospital. So commercial and reimbursement strategy. So our clients are going to be the hospitals. So we're selling to hospitals for the inpatient care, but also the outpatient and the home setting as well. So why do we do this? So inpatient, so we're selling to the hospital as a way to better monitor their patients. But then we also do this, we have in the outpatient, and when patients are released from the hospital, it's in the best interest of the hospital to continue to monitor their patients, especially with value-based healthcare that pushes hospital to be much more efficient, to release patients as early as possible, but also to monitor them for the first 24, 48 hours or 3 days. So we're going only to sell to hospitals and have them resell through the healthcare system. We have hired, and I put that into our data room, we have mandated a leading reimbursement expert in the US to look at how we are going to be able to sell. And his conclusion was that this is going to be sold by itself because it's going to be so attractive to hospitals. And if you compare the standard of care with our system, his conclusion is that after 1.5 days in the ICU, it starts to be advantageous to use our technology, not for the direct cost, because we're going to be comparable. So we're adding cost, but for all the indirect costs that we're actually going to avoid through our technology, because you don't have a certain percentage of patients that are going to escalate quickly. You don't have to overcrowd your ICU. You don't have all these indirect health costs that are actually going to come because you've missed certain alerts. Now, I've spoken about the inpatient care. For the outpatient care, we have interest from pharma companies. And I'll just give an example without giving the name of a big pharma company, but we've been working with a leading US biopharma company in the past, and now they're coming back because they have immunotherapy drugs. And I'm just going to give this as an example of how outpatient care can work. They have cancer drugs that are very efficient, and they're putting that on the market, but these drugs have side effects, and that creates inflammation. So this is not inflammation case as the first one, where it's an evolution from sepsis and shock and organ dysfunction, but it's actually coming from the drug itself. And so as a result, these biopharma companies are really eager to have a tool that will tell the doctors in the hospital where the drug is given to patients that there are side effects that are coming. And typically 12% of patients will have an adverse effect because of the drug. And that opens up new opportunities for this biopharma company, because suddenly you could, instead of incentivizing and pushing pushing the hospital to keep all the patients, all 100% patients in the hospital, which is a huge burden for the hospital and for the healthcare system, they are thinking of using our technology in the home setting, where you're keeping and tracking all the 100% patients, but knowing that 1 out of 8 will have to come back because you could see the onset. And our technology enables this, because you can do remote patient monitoring and see the inflammation that happens at the onset. So we're reducing the risk, reducing the cost for the hospital and the healthcare system, and allowing biopharma companies to be able to deliver their drug in a safer way. So outpatient and home setting are what we're going to enable through our technology as a second and third stage. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our technology. So at the beginning, I talked about a technology platform that is really rather similar to a CGM developed by Abbott or Dexcom, that have really huge market share on the CGM market. So what we're doing is we're developing a technology that has microneedles, and we are developing very, very small sensors that we put inside a microneedle. And our secret sauce is to put all that into a system and enable functionalization of the sensors to make a sensor specific to a certain biomarker. So pH and lactate are in the first clinical study, but we have a pipeline of biomarkers that are less advanced than than lactate and pH, but that has ions, other metabolites, proteins, and hormones. So ions could be potassium and sodium, but also other metabolites, glucose. So we're also working on a CGM-like solution. CRP, C-reactive protein, as I mentioned at the beginning, which is a protein for inflammation. And then we're working on cortisol, which is a hormone for stress. I have to say that the big difference with leading companies like Abbott and Dexcom are twofold. So it comes from the fact that we are semiconductor technology, which is a huge difference from what they have. And as a result, that opens two different things. First, it allows us to do multiplexing. So we can envision a solution where we have different sensors at the same time on the same device, because our footprint of sensors are extremely small compared to the other ones. And we believe that this is a huge advantage because our health is complex and it's not just one biomarker that needs to be followed at once, but it's a mix of different biomarkers, and that allows us to do risk stratification, risk mitigation in a much smarter way. So that's one big advantage. And the second advantage of using semiconductors and highly miniaturized sensors, it allows us to actually go beyond metabolites, glucose and lactate, and it allows us to go into proteins and hormones, which is non-existent today in a wearable format. And we're very confident that our technology will allow that. So we have our first protein, I mentioned CRP, C-reactive protein for the onset of inflammation. We achieved in vitro results, impressive in vitro results last year. And now our goal is to continue to optimize and put that into a wearable system for, so inside the needle for a in vivo, but also I mentioned hormones, so the other family hormones, and we also have exciting results around cortisol. We're working with a chip manufacturer in Europe to enable this on graphene. We have different families of patents, some coming from us, some as exclusive license from our academic partner. And so we have this platform that allows multiplexing for, I said, metabolized ions, proteins, hormone in the interstitial fluid. We have a solution that is highly miniaturized. And also, I did not talk yet about our partnering with a chip manufacturer, but let me go into this point right now. So part of our team on our advisory boards, and I'll just go into quickly talking about one of our advisors. So I mentioned Dr. Xsensio from the Mayo Clinic, which is a shareholder of our company. We have the ICU doctor in Switzerland. And our third advisor is actually the CTO of Texas Instruments, who is a big believer in what we're doing, who actually was involved on a personal basis at TI when TI did the CGM with Abbott. So he's a big believer in the concept of CGMs and a big believer in the concept of expanding the CGMs to other biomarkers. So we are very excited to have TI, and we have, I think I put that into our database. We have a MOU with TI, where TI is actually investing $1.1 million in kind into the company. And we're been working for about a year now with a lot of exchanges between the two companies to adapt the platform of TI, Texas Instruments, to be much more miniaturized. And they are giving us wafers, we're putting our sensors on it, and we're testing together. And their solution or our combined solution is going to be part of the clinical study in Switzerland, beginning of next year. So I just wanted to mention this as a small parenthesis on the chip manufacturing. In terms of competitive landscape, so this table is actually a way of looking at, in general, so on the extreme, you have centralized labs that are just giving single point measurements. They can do the whole range of biomarkers, and extremely well established companies like Abbott, Roche, Siemens, Quest, QIAGEN. Then you have point of care, also do just single point. It's much faster, reliable, well-established, and there's a lot of competition that's happening. Also, they can do a very broad platform. And then on the other side, you have obviously wearable devices on the far right, but that gives not biochemical data, but gives physical data, number of steps and movement and heart rate. And you have CGMs here in the middle. And our technology platform allows us to go, instead of just focusing on glucose and metabolites, enables the opening to a very different world where you can measure metabolites, but also proteins and hormones, thanks to the high miniaturization of our senses. This is today, there is no solution on the market except glucose, I mentioned. And there are a few startup companies, some well-funded, some less, that are working on going beyond, so on proteins and hormones like us. But there is no solution on the market. And it's a very sort of, I think in the coming 5 years, it's going to be a much more active, but we want to keep an edge on this new market. We're working with, I mentioned we're a small team, so our specialization is working on the sensor and developing the lab on skin, which is modulating the sensing technology to make it sensitive to a series of different biomarkers. And every development is complex. So the team is working on lactate and pH right now with very good results, but also working on, for each biomarker that we choose to work on, there is a lot of know-how that is developed to find the best functionalization of our senses. It could be enzymes, it could be antibodies, it could be aptamers, could be other things like MIPS. And we're developing this knowledge on how to find the right functionalization, surface functionalization, and how to choose the best one for each biomarker, and how to make that as stable as possible. So that's really our specialty. Working with partners on small series productions, working with leading hospitals. So Mayo Clinic, you all know them. CHUV is a leading hospital in Switzerland where we're going to do our study, fully funded. Charité is a leading cardiovascular hospital in Germany, one of the best in Europe. And Gustave Roussy is a cancer, one of the best cancer places in Europe, based in France. So we have clinical studies that are already paid through grants and that are happening in 6 months to 2 years from now, depending on which ones. We do have a lot of interest from corporate partners. We've been approached by a number of leading companies on the medtech or on the pharma side. We've worked with them through accelerator programs. They've invited us many times to come and present what we're doing. So we're updating them on a regular basis, and we see them as potentially acquirers of the company, but also in the short to mid-term as partners in product development, but also as distribution channels, because they do have access. I'm talking about GE Healthcare or Omron, or these companies do have already all the entries into hospitals. And we believe that packaging our solution with theirs could provide synergies for both companies. So now let me finish with the team. So I mentioned that I created a company with Adrian UNESCO. So he's a leading researcher. He has been awarded a few months ago an IEEE award. So he's really at the cutting edge of his field. He is CTO, CSO at this stage, and director of board member like myself. And Ali Saidi has a PhD in electrical engineering and electronics, coming from the lab of nanotechnology, and he's our head of product development and leading all the work in a very cross-disciplinary team that has people from nanotechnology to biology to chemistry to AI, and it's really at the intersection of all these fields that we're actually trying to innovate as much as possible. I talked about our partners already. Our goal is to, I mentioned, start with inpatient, then outpatient, then home market monitoring. We are selling to hospitals. Our revenues come from the sale of the device. And we didn't go into details, but we have a reusable piece that has electronics, that has the Bluetooth, And we're making our revenues from the little cartridge that has a needle and the sensors. And for now, it's going to be used for 12 to 24 hours for a shift, nurse shift. But then our goal is to extend this once we go into outpatient and home market. But for the first market, inpatient is going to be 12 to 24 hours. And then that changes afterwards. So now let me just go quickly into the first slide that was capturing the information. So about the round. So we have a Series A ongoing. We did already achieve last month our first close. And actually we reached our target a few weeks ago of 5 million. That was the target of the company. The lead investor is W.I. Harper. Has under management over time, has managed over $1 billion, based in San Francisco, based also in Taiwan and Beijing. It's a huge investment firm, but they are already extremely active in our strategy and in helping us reach out to new investors. It's co-led by a fund called Privilege Ventures in Europe. And so W.R. Harper put 2 million. Privilege Ventures put 500,000. We have some of our early investors putting again. And then we are extremely happy to have the European Innovation Council, which is a fund at the European level that supports the most innovative companies, breakthrough technologies, matching with another 2 million. So they matched whatever W.R. Harper put in. So we have our 5 million round. We reach our target. Now we are in the oversubscribed phase. And we gave ourselves another until 24th of June to reach whatever we want above this. And then we stopped on the 24th of June because the board believes that the conditions will likely change afterwards as we're progressing. So we'd love, as I mentioned at the beginning, we'd love to have experienced investors, angel investors come in and share any insight that either on the technology or on the healthcare, on the access to hospitals, on medtech regulation in general. So we're very open to actually experience from angel investors.
Thank you, Esmeralda. I have quite a few questions. So first off, everyone, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. I'm going to get into my questions. And I will have two types of questions. One is around the technology itself. The second is around exit, right? So let's talk about the technology. How mature is ISF monitoring? Who else is doing this? And very specifically, I want to understand what is the sensitivity of ISF monitoring versus blood monitoring, right? Yeah. And also, in an ICU setting, do you see this as an additional to blood monitoring? Like there'll be blood draws at intervals and then complemented by the Xsensio device, or how will it work?
Thanks, Swati, for these two questions. So the maturity of ISF, so I would say it's extremely mature for glucose, very well understood. CGMs are positioning themselves as a way to measure trends, and they're not going head to head with blood glucose, but they're going head to head with trends. So they're providing trends, and this is what is important for doctors for diabetes care. And from all our conversations with ICU doctors, it's actually trends that matter for them. So they want to be able to see as quickly as possible if a patient starts to be unwell or a patient starts to recover, and they want to save time on that. So they're not looking at correlation on the absolute values, but they're looking for correlations on trends. Now, when we talk to doctors, either at Mayo or in the Swiss hospital, when we ask them how precise and accurate should that be, and their answer is, I mean, as long as you can give us something within the 20% error terms, that's great, because we have nothing that is close to that in terms of being able to predict and give the onset of information.
Okay.
Now to your second question on add-on. So we positioned the company at the beginning as an add-on, and the market access / reimbursement expert told us that even on an add-on with beyond 1.5 days, it starts to be advantageous for a hospital to use it. Now, when we talk to ICU doctors, they say, well, there's nothing that prevents us from using this instead of regular lactate tests, because they don't like to do lactate tests because the patients are already very vulnerable. They don't want to take more blood from them.
Yeah, and also in some cases, it's hard to find the veins to draw from for really old.
Yeah.
Okay. Understood. The data that you generate, do you think there's value to it? Or what do you think is the value for that?
So I would say, the first value is for the hospital. The hospital needs to know at any time how their patients are evolving, because hospitals are getting actually their revenues from the difference between what's the reimbursement from the healthcare system and their costs. And so if there is any way to reduce cost for a certain reimbursement, and reimbursement we all know are sealed. So there is a ceiling for reimbursement depending on the condition of patient. So if there is a category, the patient has sepsis or the patient has organ dysfunction, there is a certain reimbursement. Now, if the patient stays 3 days because it's been a good care, or 12 days because the hospital has missed a number of things, if the patient remains in that category of condition, then there is no additional reimbursement. And so any way of reducing costs and preventing escalation is a financial benefit for a hospital. So this is the direct benefits from data. Now we can imagine other ways of leveraging the data. We need to see what is if there is value in selling the data in an anonymous way to pharma companies, for example, and we've been exploring a little bit this option. We need to be very careful about this, but there might be some avenues there.
Okay, thank you. In terms of comparable exits, firstly, how long do you think it takes to get an exit? And you can start with your disclaimers. But when do you think an exit happens? Is it 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever? And who do you think, how do you think is the exit happening? And what are the comparables in this business? We haven't seen any in your slides.
Yeah. I think there are different windows of opportunities for exit. In our field, we see two in particular. One sort of longer term, within, let's say, 5 years, which is a window where we start selling, and we are going to be rewarded on how easily we can get hospitals on board and how quickly we can sell and acquire new customers. And build the distribution channels, and there the goal would be to actually have a partner that has already all these distribution channels and values some of the customers that we have. Now, do we want to wait 5 to 6 or 7 years? This is one question. I know that our board, the new board, is thinking of a time frame of 3 to 5 years to sell the company. And we see a window of opportunity faster, so within the 3-year window, where we're going to have, at the beginning of FDA approval, we're going to be able to show a very strong technology that has been proven in the first clinical studies, but has not been proven extensively under all conditions, and a company that would value and have that experience to finalize all the documentation to be able to sell. So it's not on the sales, our ability to have quick sales and acquire big hospitals, but at the beginning, once we have FDA approval, our ability to have and showcase a very strong technology platform. So I think these are the two windows that we envision, with a preference for the first one.
So
now,
at this point, sorry, I do have to interject and inform people that these are high-risk companies. An exit strategy may not happen, and if it does, it may not be to what you expect. With that, please carry on, Esmeralda.
Yes, thanks, Swati. In terms of potential acquirers, I would say we envision different types of motivations from different groups of companies, but I think the ones that would most likely value our company as are probably the CGM companies that are in a very competitive industry right now, with a lot of head-to-head competition between 2 or 3 big companies, and we mentioned Abbott, Dexcom, and Medtronic, where there is a lot of R&D that goes into incremental improvements of a technology to make it cheaper, a bit more stable, but there is no disruption at the level that we can bring to be able to go from a single product to a platform that address different conditions in different settings. So I would say that's probably the best case for our companies to be acquired by a CGM company. But we also see medtech companies in hospital settings that are providing monitoring of patients of, I would say, traditional vital signs, ECG companies, for example, that are eager to enter into the biochemical field and combine, let's say, a CGM with a inflammation biomarker monitoring tool and open that new industry for them. So I would say these are the two, with a slight preference for the first type of companies.
Do you have any data on what is the size of acquisitions these CGM companies? I'm guessing CGM company would be someone like Abbott, right?
Yeah.
Abbott or whatchamacallit, what was the other company? Hang on.
Dexcom and Medtronic, these are the 3, yes.
Yes. Do you have a sense of what is the size of acquisitions these companies have been making?
I mean, I can have a slide on this that I can share on the data room with different, I mean, I would say there is a wide diversity of, and none of them is really a close comparable to what we do. So we are opening a new category, whereas the other ones are actually sort of CGM companies buying another one, or buying a vital signs monitoring. So we see sort of differences in the type of acquisitions that could happen, and the types of markets that could open for them.
Got it. Thank you. So, and additionally, how much more funding or how many potential rounds of funding do you think you need to get to either exit point A or exit point B?
So right now so we have 5 million. We'd like to go to 6 to 7 million, and go from there to a point where we have a technology that is validated in an observational study. But then we're planning a Series B, and Series B is, we're thinking of between Series A and Series B, a big jump in the value of the company. That is going to happen end of next year. And we're thinking of a Series B of 10 to 15 million. After that, we would have, that will give us enough time to explore a acquisition type of sort of an exit during that time. And depending on, the rest, I mean, we could have that kind of scenario happening in 27, 28.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. So just a quick comment to the people who are attending this call. The reason I ask about the eventual valuation, as an investor, we tend to be looking for exits, right? You are. And this is just an estimate. I've written on this. I'll share some blogs as to how you can think of investing in early stage company. There is going to be dilution. The amount of fundraising slash or the number of rounds kind of determines how much dilution there's going to be, about 25 to 30%, sometimes more at each round. And so whatever you invest today will jump in valuation based on the exit value, but will also be diluted by a certain amount. You need to take all of that into account. All right. Thank you very much, Esmeralda. There is a question here. Is there a known list of biomarkers that can be detected through interstitial fluid?
That's a good, very good question. So I think what scientists would say is, I would say 80% of biomarkers that you can find in blood would be found in ISF, interstitial fluid. Now, at this stage, everything is open for us, but we are except I would say highly diluted biomarkers. So when we talked, for example, to a heart doctor, they would say, well, if you could do troponin, that would be amazing. But that's one of the most difficult, highly diluted biomarkers. So we have limitations, because I have to say, for those who are scientists on the call, this is label free. So there is no label involved, no reagents in any way. So it's a device that would work by itself on body and ideally be able to repeat those sensing. And in the case of lactate, it's every minute the sensor works and gives a value. In the case of CRP, we have to find ways of repeating that measurement. But we are working under a lot of constraints that do not happen in a centralized lab or in a point of care device. So without any labels and any reagents. And so that creates some challenges if you want to go into very diluted biomarkers, which are already challenges for, I would say, centralized labs. Anyways.
Okay, so 80% of what you can get from blood.
Yeah.
About
So
another with about in a band of 20% accuracy. Right?
yes, yeah. Which is, I mean, that's what is good enough for doctors. Obviously, we want to beat that as much as possible.
Great. Well, thank you. Are there any other questions? This is the last call for questions. Otherwise, we should just wrap up. I'm gonna chat for a bit while we give people to ask. If there's any remaining questions, they should just ask. Otherwise, we'll be wrapping up. So Esmeralda, when are you next in the US?
I mean, I think